Welcome back to another video in our bus build series. In today's video we put up some walls and we raised the roof. Okay, so to start off we are working on the ceiling, and for reference we are using 1/4 inch or 5mm thick 4x8 sheets of plywood for our ceiling, very similar to the one shown on the screen. And the reason for going with 1/4 inch is it's that happy medium where you get good flexibility, which allowed us to meet the contour of the roof relatively easily, but it also gives you that rigidity that you're looking for when you're looking to secure this to the roof. And in our case we use screws, which allowed us to countersink those screws, and if you're using brad nailers it's going to allow you to secure it without blowing through the panel. So in these first few clips what I'm working on is actually cutting out the holes for our speakers as well as for our recessed lights, and this can be different for everybody based on how many lights you have and what fixtures you have going into our ceiling. For us we had 4 speakers and 6 lights. We did run into a slight snag, and the issue that we are running into is that while our panel is flexible, it's not quite flexible towards the ends of the ceiling. What actually ends up happening is on this bus roof, the curvature intensifies significantly towards the end, and this panel just does not have the flexibility to meet that curvature. So there are a few things that you can do. One of them is you can actually soak your panel, and soaking your panel in water will allow it to become more flexible. I decided to go with a much easier option, which, as you can see, what I ended up doing was cutting our panel at that seam and creating a sort of lapping joint where I can tuck that piece we cut underneath the ceiling, and that actually holds it in place really well, but it also gives us enough room where I can screw both of those panels into the stud. Now, to ensure you don't see that joint, we're going to run a smooth bead of caulk right over that and then paint over that, so it should be a pretty seamless joint and pretty unnoticeable once complete. Now, to secure our panels to the roof, we went with a 2-pronged approach, starting with a single bead of construction adhesive along the studs, and then finishing it off with a number 6 screw that we were able to countersink into the panels for a flush finish. With both of these methods, I don't see us having any issues with these panels ever coming loose or ever having the risk of them falling down. Now, moving on to the walls, we ended up going with a 3/8 inch thick plywood sheathing. This plywood is a BC grade plywood, so it's not the highest quality plywood with the nicest finish, but it does have a pretty good finish on the one side versus the other. So we ended up facing that nicer side on the inside of the bus, which is going to be the side that you see when you're in the bus. Going with the BC grade plywood definitely helped save some money on cost. I think these sheets were about $22 a sheet at the time we got them. You can see now at the time of making this video, they were $38 a sheet, so the price has definitely risen. But when we did get them, that was a pretty reasonable price considering the times that we are in right now. Now, talking a little bit more about the finish, obviously this plywood isn't going to give you the high quality finish that a cabinet grade plywood would give you, but we're not super concerned with that because how we plan to work around that is we're going to use a wood filler to fill all of the screw holes as well as any large knots that are visible, like you can see here on this one sheet, and then sanding all of that down. Another reason why the finish quality isn't a major concern of ours is that once we get all of our major components and furniture pieces into the bus, like our bed frame, shower stall, and then all of the cabinets we plan on putting in, you're actually not going to see much of these walls at all. I think we'll be lucky if we see 10 to 20%. With that being said, we will still be finishing every piece of plywood, visible or not. We're just going to put a greater emphasis on the pieces that we know will be visible and put a little bit more time and effort in making those look as good as possible. Finishing every piece of plywood, visible or not, is super important to us because it gives you a much more professional look, as well as the fact that it gives you a uniform coat of mold and mildew resistant paint and primer, which should help down the road. Okay, so now we'll get back in the nitty gritty of installation, where you can see here I'm covering up one of our windows. That's where our future shower stall is going to be, so we decided to get rid of that window. Also back here where our bed is going to be, we decided to delete both of these windows. We used very similar methods on both of these windows. We blacked them out with spray paint on the interior, and then we went over that spray paint with foam insulation, and then we're going over it with 3/8 inch board. With the majority of the driver's side done, I'm cutting the first large board for the passenger side right here, and I'm actually having to trim down the foam some because it wasn't quite flush with the studs. You need the foam flush with the studs, or else you're going to get bowing in your board when you go to screw it on, and things just won't be even, and you want that board to be completely even all the way across. This was an interesting board to hang because it actually had to be cut at a slight angle due to the door frame being at a slight angle. So once I got everything in place, I was able to screw this on pretty quickly, but I also had to deal with the fact that I had a few major wires running behind this board, so I wanted to make sure I hit those studs just perfect. Okay, so here I'm working on one of the last boards, and it's a pretty custom board. This is actually going to be going above the entry doorway, and obviously you can see there's a few notches here. I was running into a little bit of issue with my jigsaw. The blade just was really dull, and I didn't have any extras, so I decided to grab my angle grinder, which definitely isn't intended for this use, but I figured there's only one cut I gotta make, so I can do it with this, and it came out pretty well, and the board fit great, so we got this in place. Okay, so we had one more board to hang, and it was where we deleted another window. This window is actually where our fridge is going to sit, and our fridge was going to block the entire window. So we figured why not just totally delete it, add some extra insulation into the bus, so that's what we did. With the final wall boards hung, we were able to move back to the ceiling and get these last few boards installed. The reason we waited till the end is if we did the ceiling boards before we did our wall boards, we would have had a greater risk of alignment issues on these boards. And these boards are pretty crucial because they're at eye level. You're going to see most of the inconsistencies pretty easily, so we wanted these to be as finished and well done as possible. The last large section that we needed to work on was this rear AC unit, and what we were going to do here is pretty much encase the entire unit and then cut out holes for the intake as well as the exhaust. So what I had to do here was run just a couple short studs on the bottom section, and then I was able to secure our plywood to those studs and finish off this bottom section. After scribing the curve of the roof onto this piece of plywood, I broke out my trusty angle grinder again, because at this point I was still clearly out of jigsaw blades, and I went ahead and cut out that curve on our piece of plywood. From there, I traced my vent covers and made my cuts. Installation on this piece was pretty seamless. You can see here I've got some 2x4s, and the reason for those is I really only had 2 mounting points on this back piece, and I just felt as though over time I would get warping if I only went with 2 mounting pieces, so I ended up putting in those 2x4 reinforcements so that I could mount this rear panel in 6 places to limit the chances of warping. As always, I just wanted to thank everybody for watching, and if you have any questions, please ask them in the comment section below.